And as we get ready to start the session, I'm going to be starting our live stream for our LinkedIn and YouTube viewers. Please bear with me for a moment, and then we will begin.
You could be on mute.
Oh. I am not on mute. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So before we start, I would like to remind people how to use the WebEx controls. The Q&A boxes for your questions for Krishna and Russell, and we'll keep track of those for the question and answer period at the end of this panel. You can also enter comments into the chat box, and Russell and Krishna will be able to see those. As I said, today's session is a panel discussion, corporate upskilling and reskilling, trends from 21 and strategies for the future. And let's get started with a quick poll of the audience to give Krishna and Russell an idea of who we're speaking to today. So this first poll is in two parts. What is your role in your organization? And the second part is just a gauge of how you're doing today. We've been asking that during the pandemic to make sure that we have a feel for how people are holding up under the stress. And we'll give about another 20 seconds. We'll close the poll in about 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. All right. The largest cohorts are other functional leader and learning and development managers. Some interesting representation from marketing and sales. We also are glad to see that everybody's doing at least in the middle, and most of you are doing well today. So with that, let's move on to introductions. Our panelists today are Krishna Kumar, the CEO of Simplilearn, and Russell Kenrick, the Managing Director of ILX Group. Krishna founded Simplilearn in 2010. It went from being a blog on project management to worldwide digital education company with 3 million users and counting, and he is an acknowledged thought leader in edutech. Russell leads a portfolio of companies that specialize in corporate training and consulting, based in the UK, where they are Simplilearn's partner and operating in a number of different countries. So we're very glad to have you both here today. And I'm going to start off with an interesting fact. Upskilling and reskilling took precedent in 2020 because of the patterns that were established before the pandemic and the acceleration of the pandemic imposed on everyone in terms of new behaviors and the need to do things in a non-contact fashion. So what you both see as the biggest changes that enterprises have had to make to adapt to this new reality? I'll let you start.
Krishna, I kind of lost the end of that question, but do you want to have a swing at this one first?
Yeah, Russell. So if I got it right, Stuart, what you meant to ask is that with this pandemic coming, what were some of the priorities of the enterprises and how those priorities changed? See, from my
Yes.
perspective, I think the biggest thing that I noticed, and I saw like enterprises in my network talking about is that, see, this was one of a kind disruption. Nobody ever imagined that something like this will happen. But I think one of the like characteristic of human race always has been that adapting to anything new that was thrown as a challenge, and that's why as a species we survive. And when this whole thing happened, I think most industries, most people try to adapt to this new change. And I think within a couple of months, we all accepted this as a new reality, that this is the new reality now. Keeping this as a constant, let's figure it out on what as an enterprise we can do, right? So when you think about it, digital disruption, I think that it was already happening before the pandemic also. It was not something new. It's just that because of the pandemic, because of this whole new phenomena of being locked inside your homes, reaching out to your customers remotely, trying to fulfill your daily needs again remotely, I think that drove a lot of transformation for all kinds of companies. People could very clearly see that companies which were fully digital, I think their business started booming because people were just logging into their internet and trying to find anything and everything that they could get their hands on delivered at home. And companies who were fully physical, they started experiencing a lot of challenge. And that's where they started figuring it out ways in which they can also move a part of their business online and try to survive or eventually thrive. This as an opportunity, right? So I think this the first few months were a period where everybody was like still trying to accept the new reality, and then people started adapting. And I have seen all kinds of examples where companies which were like all fully digital, they've accelerated big time. Those who were not digital at all, they have made at least good progress. So I think net the whole impact of pandemic was that what was already happening, the digital disruption was already happening. It just got accelerated in a very accelerated manner, something that companies never believe that they can work that fast, right? But everybody adopted, and look where we are, right? While we expected the economy to do very bad and a lot of job losses and whatnot, but if the stock market is one indication, I think it was never a better time to invest in stocks than during the pandemic. So sometimes it is like very difficult to accept the reality, but that's where we are. I think it turned out to be a great opportunity for all kinds of businesses, except a few which got really impacted big time, and hopefully they also find a way of coming back strongly in future.
Yeah, I agree. So I think, adversity is the mother of invention, and we've definitely seen huge amounts of challenge for organizations that we work with. The disruption at the beginning was significant. We know that, we saw that. Lots of organizations had to very quickly change. But as I said, that adversity became the invention that people needed to go and do things differently. And I think if you're responsible for a learning organization, for an enterprise, for a large organization, you would have coped with significant amounts of change right at the beginning. And I think one of the things to remember is that the pandemic didn't cause the digital transformation that's going on, it just accelerated it, but it also didn't hit everywhere at the same time. So there's a phasing issue going on as well. So we see different organizations, different countries, different locations. You've got a global business, ours is as well, and we saw the impact hit different countries at different times. Of course, the big challenge is around customer interactions moving to online, even in traditional, what might be called bricks and mortar businesses, huge amounts of movement towards customers' engagement being online. We saw the acceleration of the use of artificial intelligence and automation. Lots of jobs that just used to exist all of a sudden couldn't exist, and then organizations found ways to innovate around them, and now those jobs don't exist anymore. They've almost been automated out of the employment system. We're seeing quite a big distinction between organizations who could easily work from home and those organizations with frontline workers where working from home is not possible. So you've got that at play, and I guess if you're supporting an enterprise that has frontline workers and work from home workers, you've got to balance the needs of both of those core audience groups. And what we're seeing now is this sort of real acceleration of so many businesses, yes, led by tech businesses, but almost all businesses now, and that is leading to some significant skill shortages. And I guess one of the reasons we're talking here today is this concept of can you hire in the resources you need to help you achieve your business goals, or do you have to upskill and reskill those people within your organization? And it very much depends on where you are in your own growth cycle as an organization. But we saw jobs lost during the pandemic, and some of those low-skill jobs may never come back. And so that poses some challenges going forward. But I do agree with you when we talk about digital transformation already being underway, and the impact of the pandemic was really an accelerant for it.
Yep.
Okay, that leads to a question regarding a survey that recently happened, and we did a white paper based on that. Donald H. Taylor looked at the L&D professionals worldwide, asked them what was the top of mind trend for this coming year. This was at the beginning of 2021. And reskilling and upskilling were the top trends in collaborative social learning as a modality for that. So, given that, how do the changes in digital transformation drive what skills enterprises require? What things they need to add to their teams, what things that they need to deepen. Russell, you mentioned AI, for example. How does it also impact the tools that enterprise L&D uses for upskilling and reskilling? And I've put that question into the chat box so that.
I mean, from my point of view, there's two things colliding here. On one hand, you've got some skill shortages that are developing particular areas, and that's colliding with other areas where automation is taking jobs away. So both of those factors are at play, and sometimes the narrative around them is contradictory. So when I think about skill shortages, I did something this morning. I just went into Google. How many vacancies have we got in my three big core markets? How many vacancies are there in the UK at the moment? It's about 1.1 million vacancies. How many vacancies are there in the Australian market? It's about 330,000. How many vacancies are there in the US at the moment? 10 million vacancies. So, just their very quick Google survey, hands up, it may not be accurate, but you get the flavor for there are, millions of vacancies if you look across the world. And those vacancies are in areas maybe that are different to where the labor gaps that have been created by coronavirus and the pandemic. And so if you're in enterprise learning and you're thinking about this challenge of I've got skill gaps, I need more technical roles, I need more program management roles, I need more data scientists, but the pool of employees that we're looking to recruit from might not have those skills. You've got that kind of problem. Another survey I looked at recently, I think it was a McKinsey survey called Beyond Hiring, and they said about 87% of employers are currently experiencing skill gaps or expect them in the next few years. So that's almost everybody, and that's a significant thing for us to deal with. Krishna, do you want to add something before I go into the tools and the things that are going on?
Yeah, Russell, I definitely want to add. See, one thing completely aligned with what you said about automation taking away job, and at the same time, everywhere you see there are a lot of openings. In fact, I want to add the India angle here. So, as a country, we are a country of billion plus people, right? And if you talk to businesses all across, right, all kinds of businesses, their number one challenge today is not whether they have customers order, whether their product and services in demand or not. Most of them are talking about lack of skilled talent. And that's so ironical, right? At one place in a country like ours, we talk about how can we add employment, how can we add new jobs, and at the same time there are people not able to find enough trained skilled manpower. Just before this call, I was in a call with one of the largest IT services contribute in US and India, and they were talking about that if they had the kind of skill talent that they're looking at on time, they can easily add another 10 to 12% year-on-year growth on their growth rate, and they're already growing at about 30-40%. So imagine a multi-billion-dollar company growing at another 10% on their growth rate. So we are talking about a huge amount of numbers here. And if you take a step back, the reason why this has happened, because of this whole digital disruption, this whole automation and being driven by all kinds of companies, suddenly there is a huge demand of digital talent. And if everybody is tapping into the same talent pool which was ready before this whole transformation become a priority, obviously there's demand and supply gap catching up, and these people have become very expensive, and beyond a time you can't. If there are millions of opening and there are availabilities only few 100,000, there are people who are not going to get this talent. And that's where we have seen that a lot of companies are focusing a lot on how can they build this talent on their own. And hence this whole learning and development and building this kind of talent has become a big priority for L&D professional. One trend that I noticed in many large companies is that many of these companies are running L&D function as a business function. So in the past, L&D used to be a enabler that, okay, we also do L&D. If you are looking at learning and development, we encourage employee to learn and get ready for the new skill. But now it has become such a big business priority that it is being run as a business function, and metrics are being tracked very closely on how many new people we got into some of these newer skills, so that our project and product priorities are not getting compromised.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the skill or job role gap. I think another report I looked at, so something like 150 million new roles in digital transformation related roles between now and 2025. So 4 years. We're talking about a significant amount of vacancies. Even if we talked earlier that they're here today, those new roles have got, in order for organizations to meet their growth targets, those roles have got to be filled. And to fill those roles, we've got a real challenge on our hand to upskill people to be able to fill those roles. And when I think about learning and development and the enterprise learning and development folk that I work with, they're looking at juggling a huge number of tools and platforms that they could use to deliver learning. They've dealt with the fact that learning used to be a blend between online learning and physical in-person learning, and they have to shift towards, certainly during the pandemic, almost 99 or 100% virtually delivered or online learning delivered. That's a big change in the learning space. But it's become, to me at least, more than just about the platforms where there's loads of choice for organizations. It's become about the partnerships that they can create. Learners, so the customer, our end customers in the learning business are the people who need these skills. And what is happening there is also changed, because something that people talk about, learning in the flow of work, learning at the point of need. When you've got that gap, you need a solution then and there. And so enterprise learning teams got to think about how do they have the resources for their employees so that in the flow of work they can learn. Because the customer, the end employee who needs learning, the skills gap we're trying to close, they don't want to wait a few weeks. They want it yesterday when they need it in the flow of work. And they do that in their personal lives. This is a big shift change that came about because of the pandemic. Everyone is a bit more aware personally of what they're trying to achieve, and maybe soulfully thought inwards during the pandemic about what's important to them, and staying healthy, developing, living true to their values. Those things become really important to people. And during that period of reflection, a lot of people came out the other side going, I'm going to develop myself. I'm going to develop some new skills for myself. And I'm relying on my workplace to help me do that. And if my workplace isn't ready, then I'm going to do it myself. I might go to YouTube. I might go for different types of learning resources, but I'm going to do it because I'm that way motivated. And I think that's where enterprise learning teams need to think about how do they build a culture for learning within their organization. Because if you can build or foster a culture of lifelong learning within your organization, you're on the right direction. And I always classify that as being able to say, are people focused on growth? Are people trying to become masters of different subject areas, not just one? Are they being stretched out of their comfort zone? Are we promoting them to take personal responsibility for their learning? Are we helping people to direct them to learn the things that they love? If you can align somebody behind something that they're passionate about and provide them new skills about that, you've got a highly sort of focused, highly valuable employee and somebody who's enjoying life. And if you get those things right, then the objectives of how do we fill some of these vacancies, how do we get people doing these jobs, they sort of solve themselves.
So what we know from the digital transformation is that digital transformation requires digital skills. So as you pointed out, this is not a new thing. It's been accelerating before 2020, got into overdrive during the pandemic. So now digital skills are essentially survival skills. And so the question for you is, what do you see as the mix of skills required between end users of digital technology, the developers of digital business systems, and then the business skills around the technology, like project management or marketing, that are impacted by digital transformation? Russell, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So when I think about that skill shortage, I talked about the 150 million roles, and you kind of look at where those roles are expected to come from. That'll give you some clues to the sorts of programs that might be needed, and the skills that might be needed. But I'd take a step back from that a little bit and say this is, again, advice or thoughts around managing learning for an enterprise. Learning should be thought of as a strategic capability, a strategic differentiator in an organization's value proposition. And then when you think about designing or developing learning programs or a curriculum, set against those skill gaps, it's about saying, well, what are the skills that this organization needs? Where are the gaps likely to be in the future? And then deciding which of those gaps we're going to reskill employees to fill versus which are we going to hire in external new talent in order to fill them. And that's where you can do a time and a cost analysis to say, well, which is the right approach. If you need it super quick, maybe hiring is the right approach, but maybe if you can see in your roadmap, in your pipeline, a flavor or a transformation, you can look at different ways. And I would say, back to number of different jobs. Technical skills like software development, mobile software, cloud, data, machine learning, cyber security. If we've got this much digital transformation on, there's a hell of a lot of project managers needed. There's a huge amount of change going on. Change is just projects. So, those are the sorts of technical skills that organizations need to invest in. But they also need to invest in the leadership skills and the softer skills that allow and enable people to build teams and to deliver and execute on strategies. Technical skills alone will never allow organizations to deliver strategy. So I'm seeing a shift from maybe traditionally what we would call T-shaped people, a broad understanding of lots of areas and real depth and expertise in one area, towards what people are calling M-shaped people. So 3 or 4 deep areas of expertise, as well as those broad capabilities. And it's that combination which allows them to work in cross-functional teams, allows them to be more effective. So if I'm thinking about the enterprise, how do I encourage the people in my organization to be able to fulfill multiple skill areas in overlapping areas? Those are the sorts of things that I can see. And how would I blend the content between formal structured content and informal, say, less structured content, more bite-sized content? Because again, people don't always have the time to do a 2-hour module or a long course. Some do, but not all of them do. And so for enterprise teams, is how do I provide people with small nuggets of bite-sized content as well?
Krishna, do you want to comment on that?
I think, Stuart, I don't have anything to add. I think I completely agree with what the points that Russell has made. So I think let's get to the next point. I think all the point I completely agree.
Okay. As a sidelight, we have a definitional question from one of our YouTube viewers. Asks, what do you see as the difference between upskilling and reskilling? So that.
I'm not able to hear you, Stuart, very clearly. Russell, is it the case with you also?
I think I got the question. So that how do we define the difference between upskilling versus reskilling?
Yeah. So I'll pick it up that, Russell. See, I think from my perspective, I think obviously these words are being used quite together in various conversations. But from my perspective, see, reskilling is a event based action wherein you were working on a certain industry, certain area, certain role, and based on how the whole world is shifting, you acquire a major skill. So you completely reskill from one place and get ready for a new role. So it's a very involved process, requires a lot of time to shift from one role to another role. Sometimes it can be the role within the same industry. Sometimes it can be totally changing the industry also. There are a lot of people who have changed industry very, very successfully depending upon their circumstances. So that's reskilling. One example to understand is this whole like airline industry. Airline got impacted in a big way, and we saw all kinds of reskilling be done by people who were serving the airline industry, and they got ready for various other jobs in other industries if you are looking for this kind of more or less same raw talent, but additional skill that made them employable. And upskilling is a process of continuously and constantly learning something new, so that you are on top of your game, right? And upskilling need not be happen through a formal training process. While you execute your job, also you can upskill. You can watch a short YouTube video and you can learn. You get mentored by your maybe your manager who's trying to explain you the new role and what he or she expects from you to deliver that role. So upskilling is a constant process. We are doing it all the time. Everyone does it. Sometimes upskilling can also be done through a structured program, but reskilling is usually done through a very, very structured program to get you ready for the new role.
Very good. That's a clear explanation. That's actually a clearer explanation than the idea I had in mind. So Russell had talked a bit about what the impact of work from home had to do, and the workforce is kind of split between essentials, the people who have to be at work in person, and remotes, who are the people who can work from home. And as you mentioned before, this happened suddenly. This happened overnight. But it also means that in-person training is no longer an option for people who are working remotely. So how has this impacted the way corporate learning and development has been structured and delivered for the new environment? Right, Krishna, you can take that.
So actually, if I get it right, Story is saying that essentials have to work from office, and people who are working remotely, they can work for remote. Frankly, I'm not necessarily agree with this statement. It all depends upon the nature of the job, right? So what we are telling by this statement, that if you're working remotely, you are not effective. I don't think you can make a generic statement like that, right? There are roles that can be performed perfectly well remotely. There are roles that require being in person. Like for example, like if you have an operation to perform, the doctor has to be in operation theater personally, right? But if you have to like just consult a patient, and doctor can maybe perhaps do it remotely to speak and maybe come and check the vitals later on in person, right? Something similar is true in the digital industry also. Like a lot of work, training, customer service, handling queries, all can be perfectly done remotely. So I think the definition of what is essential and what is not essential is not dependent upon whether you are working remotely or you are working in person. It depends upon the roles. Some roles require in physical presence, some role requires remote presence, and the work that is happening remotely can also be an essential work, not necessarily it's a second priority work.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate choice of words that that particular consultant used when they developed those terms, because essential people, in their view, are the people who have to be hands-on out in the field, but that doesn't make the people doing remote work any less essential, obviously. So yeah, I agree entirely with your point. Then the question has to be, you know, now that we have so many people who are working remotely, um, we've seen in Simplilearn's business the impact that that's had on demand for our services. So could you comment a bit on how that's changed for enterprise learning and development industry-wide?
Actually, I'm having trouble hearing you, Stuart, very clearly. I don't know if it's a problem at my end or your end. The voice is coming in bits and pieces. So the question is that how it changed our business. I think we have spoken about it multiple times. One of the industries that got impacted, or I'll say got positively impacted, is obviously education, because a lot of training suddenly moved online, and the need for training also increased because of various reasons. One, suddenly the demand for digital skill skyrocketed, so a lot of companies are looking at ways to fulfill that demand. That's also being seen by individuals who are looking for a job. They see a lot of new jobs and high paid jobs are available in these digital skills, so people are looking at how can they reskill and get those jobs. So that also has its own magnifying impact. Companies looking to hire digital skilled workers, and they're doing a lot of training intervention. People who are looking for to grow faster, they are looking at changing from traditional industry to getting into digital. So that drove a lot of requirement, and these are two core needs that drove a lot of online training in our area. But there are a lot of other things also drove this requirement. One of them was engaging employees. When companies realize that their entire workforce is working remotely, and everybody is in their own different physical spaces, training was also used as a medium through which they can engage those employees, right? And that also worked as a very big motivator for employees to get connected and talk about something that not necessarily related to their current work, something that they can upskill and write on their resume. So that was another tangent that drove requirement for training. And the net result is that I think it has become a very established model now. As things go back to normal, I don't think 1 year down the line, companies are going to look at their different ways in which they used to train in the same manner that they used to see before pandemic. Our hypothesis is that skills training will completely move online. There'll still be a leadership related trainings that will happen in person, because there's a lot of value in in-person interaction when you are trying to teach some of the softer human uh, human kind of skill. But when you're like trying to teach hardcore digital skills, something that you write a code and it gets implemented, something that you try, you can learn by doing very easily, and there's only one way of doing that. I think those kind of trainings will completely move online to a large extent. And the good news also is that because of the scale, this system has got perfected now. So many millions of people have now used this way of learning online that companies have learned, reinvented their model, and now these models are ready for scale.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I think that we've seen. I think change is always difficult for people, and even though the technology existed and the wherewithal and the functions were there, people still resisted that change. And what the pandemic forced everybody to do, for the reasons you just outlined, help with engagement, etc. We've got no choice. We need to deliver some training. They forced a change, which then people started to realize, hey, this is not too bad. So what's the impact for the future on the corporate enterprise workplace? Well, I'm going to suggest things like more blended offerings, so a blend of online and offline, and more e-learning, because it works and it has now been proven. I think more partnerships with specialists as well. I think sometimes traditionally in the past, a lot more has been in-house, and I can see more partnerships becoming the norm. I think not just training programs, but learning journeys, pathways, academies, whatever you want to call them. Everyone's got a slightly different definition for them, but we're not talking about one course, 1 day, 2 day, 5 day. We're talking about 6 months, multiple interventions through different channels. That is what will change from maybe where we were. Education, so much of education and training and development as part of education comes from our experience as school children. And a lot has been documented about how that is something that hasn't evolved fast enough and is now evolving at pace. There were times during the middle of the pandemic when in my house there were 3 children on 3 separate Zoom calls and 2 adults on 2 separate Zoom calls, really testing the Wi-Fi. And you could imagine that's 5 different people all engaged in some form of learning intervention. That is a very big shift from that traditional Victorian education model. But we're seeing that happen, and it's happening very, very quickly. So teams have got to come up with that. More blended, more partnerships, the pathways and bite-sized interventions.
Yep.
I'd like to share with you some of the things that we found from a survey we did of our learners. And can you hear me, Krishna?
Yeah, I can hear you, Stuart. Yep.
Okay. I apologize for these technical difficulties. This happens sporadically with this platform. We can look at a few things that we asked our learners, and we asked about categories of course enrollment. This is actual data from our enrollments. Find that biggest areas: digital operations, data science and AI, and technology, as in software programming, that type of thing, are both important. And then there's still the digital business, project management, marketing, that type of thing. So when we look at these in terms of the most popular courses on our platform, saw that there's a lot of interest in project management in the digital operations category. A lot of things in emerging areas like cybersecurity, full stack development, cloud computing, and data science and AI are highly demanded, and analysis in marketing. So ask people what they, and we're going to ask the audience later, what the skills they are most interested in for 2021 and going forward. Does any of this surprise you in terms of the popularity of the skills? Is this you're seeing from enterprise clients? Russell, I'll ask you first.
So again, I think that the line's breaking up a little bit, but from what I understand, these aren't things that surprise me. These are the skill areas. If you think about what we just described in terms of digital transformation, lots of organizations, whether you're a technology business in the first place or you're a bricks and mortar business that is evolving, you have a huge number of complex technology-driven projects on the go at the moment. That's going to create demand in the project capability, program capability space. In order to understand how to make the right decisions around those projects, you're going to analyze data. There's huge amounts of data. Every business, every digital business has got a lot of data, but all businesses have a lot of data. And instinctive management used to play a much greater part to play in decision making. Now data analytics is playing a huge part in how you make the decisions as organizations. Leaders have really got to take that on board. But we know in our own businesses that data just multiplies and becomes really difficult to manage very, very quickly. You know, a lot of people are then revert back to gut instincts to make decisions, and that's not always the best strategy. So no, those topic areas you highlight don't surprise me one bit, and it makes sense. Krishna talking about earlier, you know, lots of people during the pandemic going to Simplilearn's product offering because it's ideally suited to organizational digital transformation.
Yep.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Krishna?
Actually, Stuart, I have a really tough time understanding the broken question. So I think, sir, can you repeat the question for me, because I'm not able to hear
Sure.
Stuart clearly.
I think the question was, when you looked at those findings, does that align with your understanding of what enterprise clients are asking?
Yeah, so I think I can definitely talk about both the areas. Like we see, like every year we train about 200,000 people on the consumer side and another 70 to 80,000 people on the enterprise side. So obviously we have a lot of rich data around what both individuals as well as enterprises are looking to get trained on. And it's not surprising. See, some of the biggest demand is in areas like data and full stacks. Obviously, they are far way ahead compared to any other area. So a lot of data is getting created. Every click is a data point, I think, and companies are trying to make sense of the data. So huge upskilling and reskilling that is happening on data. And just to clarify further, see, data is not just one skill. It's like a lot of skills that are part of data as a domain. There are people who can be data analysts, which is a entry-level roles in dealing with data. And then there are people who become like data scientists, which is a very high-end skill. Not everybody can become data scientists, but companies require data scientists, and that's a very, very deep skill required, and that also requires a lot of competency by being very strong in mathematics and statistics and so on. Then there are roles like data engineering, which is all about building platforms related to data so that data analysts can make sense of the data, they can easily fetch data, and data scientists can do a lot of their manipulation on the data. So that's definitely a huge area. Technology, again, a very big area. A lot of developers are needed to build the new age digital system. A lot of testers or quality analysts are needed to make sure that what developers are building, somebody else is testing. So technology is again a very, very big area where a lot of reskilling and upskilling happening. Other areas where we see, so I'm clubbing also cloud as part of technology, because now pretty much all new developments have moved to cloud, because cloud comes with a ready-made infrastructure wherein you can keep on adding incremental feature on the go. So these are two big area, data and technology. Of course, there are other areas like digital marketing, because a lot of companies want to acquire customers online, and it's in general a great skill for everybody to have. And then obviously the areas like project management, quality and all, there is some growth, but the growth in those professions or those areas is not nowhere compared to the kind of growth that we have seen in data and technology space.
I'm not sure if we can hear you, Stuart.
Sorry about that. I thought I had unmuted myself. Apologize for that. If you could start on this slide by addressing these trends, and then Russell, if you could add color to that.
So I think, Stuart, from my perspective, I definitely resonate with all the trends that you have listed. I think Bootcamp has definitely got good acceptance. I think bootcamps used to happen before the pandemic also, and it was like there are a lot of like local bootcamps in every city, in fact every area of a city. There used to be a provider who will get like-minded people to a physical classroom, train them and get them ready for a new role. Because of this technology, the whole training experience has moved online, and there the bigger players have this, I'll say, unfair advantage, because their ability to spend on technology, their ability to provide a great online experience is much higher than a small physical classroom provider. So this also is becoming more like a global business, and we do a lot of such digital bootcamp training across the globe. Thousands of classes we run on our platform every month. So that's definitely a trend, and there are other providers also who are offering this model of training, and this has definitely got an acceptance as a category. This was a category, but it was a small time category before the pandemic. After the pandemic, this bootcamp has been digital bootcamp has become a big category within the L&D space for sure. Partnership with higher education for sure. I think we see a lot of trend wherein some of the large institutions are partnering with providers like us to launch training program. In case of Simplilearn, we partner with the likes of MIT, Caltech, Purdue, University of Massachusetts in US, in India, the likes of IITs, which are the real Ivy League kind of institution in the country. And over time, we're looking at partnering with a lot of such institutions all across the world. And not only us, I think we see other providers also following a similar kind of trend. And the reason is that earlier higher education institutions were not so open to collaborate and launch programs. But I think this has become a kind of unsaid understanding in the market, is that training companies and education and higher education institution, they're not competing with each other. They can maybe collaborate with each other to do something that is good for the learners. So I think as that model has got established, we see a lot of openness in higher education provider to do something together. So definitely that's a trend, and I see that trend only growing in future based on the discussions that we are having with so many other educational institutions that we have. Partnership with industry providers, definitely. I think this was something that was happening even before the pandemic. I think after the pandemic it has got accelerated, because when you think about it, the demand supply gap, cloud is an area where there's a lot of demand supply gap. The top three cloud vendors, Microsoft, Google and Amazon, there's a lot of incentive for them to train a lot of people around their technology so that they become the adopters of those technologies. So this trend has got accelerated, but frankly this was pretty much the trend even before the pandemic. And role-based alignment of skill set with employer needs, I think this is a new phenomena that we are seeing because of this. People mostly being remote, companies are looking at getting people who are at different locations and identifying them on what role they can work on, and something can be done that is very very custom for those employees. So this role based learning is a new trend that we definitely hear. The companies hire and say that, hey, there are 100 people, we want to make them data analysts. So not only train them about my company's specific policies, procedures and product, but also how to do a data analyst job. So we see more and more such things happening in the market. If you go to all the consumer focused providers, and for Simplilearn, a large part of our business is consumer focused. Most of the courses will be named this way. So you'll find a course that prepares you to become a data analyst. You'll find a course that helps you prepare to become a full stack digital marketer, and so on. Because that's the trend that we see. People don't want to learn a skill for the sake of learning that skill. They want to learn something to get into a certain role. So we definitely see this also as a new trend that is catching up very soon.
I would agree with all that. The other thing I'd add is that it's back to organization demand plan, figuring out where the skill gaps are, understanding strategically which ones you want to train or retrain or upskill versus which ones you want to fill through recruitment and bringing in new talent to an organization. And I see that the real challenge for people is going to be building cultures that hold on to great employees, getting the balance right, because there's going to be high demand for some of these roles, and then building up a pipeline of new talent comes maybe through people who are new to your organization or at the beginning of their careers, where you can put together learning programs that are spread over a slightly longer period of time, but give them the essential skills they're going to need to fill those skill gaps you've identified in your strategic demand plan.
Okay. So those are great answers, and that lead us to our last poll, which relates to what our members of our audience see as the critical skills for their enterprises. So about 40 seconds to answer this poll. Obviously, you can select more than one skill because this is not an exclusive trade-off.
And there's a big convergence between product management.
Yeah.
Not always, but project managers like product.
And part of the question, of course, is how soon you would want to start a program like that. So let me show the results. And indeed, the project management business skills are the most popular category, but it's a pretty broad distribution. And more than a third of the respondents say they would like to start that kind of training in their companies right away, which makes perfect sense. So with that, I'd like to move to questions and answers. And we have a few questions from the audience. The first one is from Abhishek, who asks, where do you see the major gap between skills requirements and trained consultants? So if I understand that question, it's how do you match up the skills that an enterprise needs versus people who can fill those skills on a consulting basis versus people who can be trained to do that internally? Are you?
Do you want to have a go at that one, or
Russell, you can go ahead.
no, do you want me to?
Yeah.
Yeah, fine. Okay, so I think real challenges around upskilling internal training consultants to deliver the range of technical skills that are in people's demand plans these days. And so all the big challenges around partnerships, multiple partnerships, different types of organizations, I suspect. The other thing is building training programs in a design it once, deliver it many times mentality. And that's the other solution, so that you're not, tying up your training consultants, to deliver on a one-to-one basis or one to small number basis all the time. That if I understand the question, is my answer.
Okay. Vinod asks, has there been a noticeable difference in the effectiveness of moving hard skills training completely online? Krishna, are you able to take that?
Just a minute. So actually, from our perspective, we don't think that there is any change in the effectiveness. I think we have seen the usage increased. We have seen the number of customers enrolling for such programs has only increased. See, at the end of the day, it's an individual choice. Like some people learn uh, very comfortably sitting at their desktop as long as there is all kinds of support. There are people who might find getting into a classroom and talking physically with other participants and instructor much more comforting. But I think when it comes to whether the trainings can be delivered effectively online or not, I think there is no question to be asked there. We have there is data points of millions of people who have learned effectively. But again, it's an individual personal choice. I don't think it's whether one model works or another model works.
Okay.
I agree with that. Personal learning styles, adult learning theories come into play here, and sometimes that guides our recommendations to certain customers. But what the pandemic has shown through kind of forcing people to operate in a remote way is that more people maybe can learn remotely, using the tools that are now available than probably thought so beforehand and do it successfully.
An interesting question, because I don't know that we would necessarily agree with the premise, which is what are the steps and best practices to learn digitally better without a teacher, and how is it different from manual or in-person learning? And I know, Krishna, that digital learning doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have an instructor or a teacher with you. That, in fact, you can have that as part of digital learning. So,
Yeah, so that's the bootcamp way of learning. And a bootcamp is pretty much a cohort-based learning wherein an instructor is teaching a set of students and taking through the entire learning journey. And there are other models of digital learning wherein there are videos and you self-learn, right? So obviously there are different models, but now this instructor-led bootcamp model has become quite an established category. It used to happen before the pandemic also, but in the pandemic, since colleges and universities, schools, everything moved online, there's much more acceptance of this model. So we have adapted to this new way, and there's a lot of appreciation for this new model.
all right. We have a question from Ramachandra, who asks, will reskilling and upskilling help someone who needs to return to the workforce?
Definitely, I think there's no question asked, right? And plus, the way industry is changing, I don't think there is any other way but to continuously be on the top of your role, right? Because all roles are going through a transformation. A lot of new developments are happening. A lot of new skills are getting added to the existing roles, right? So unless you are on top of the game, there's no on top of the game through constant reskilling and upskilling. There is no way to strive and thrive in your role.
I would say it's continuous as well. So the most important thing is to develop a culture of learning and personal self-development, which means that you are always learning, always trying to pick up something new. But I think right now is a great time to be returning to the workplace, picking up some new skills and identifying, or even entering the workplace and going, well, I can see the skills that are going to be in demand, and I can align them with the things that I'm passionate about. And the next 5 to 10 years looks very, very interesting. And if you can get that Venn diagram where the thing you love overlaps with the skills people need, you've got a real winner there.
Yep. That leads into a question Tahira, who asks, what's the importance of an employee themselves taking the responsibility for their upskilling, their upgrading, and how do they make that a systematic part of their long-term development plan?
So very few people get the luxury anymore of working for one organization for all of their career. And you might even say, that's not even the most recommended approach, but it's very rare indeed. So, you know, your personal learning and development journey is something that everybody must take responsibility for. I feel very passionately about that myself. In terms of structurally working through it, you know, working with somebody else, being able to just talk out loud to somebody about your dreams and your ambitions is a good way of codifying your plans and thinking. And if that person is a mentor or somebody with a bit more experience than you, all the better. But definitely, if you're relying on your employer to develop your career, you're making a mistake, in my opinion. I mean, they may help fund it, they may point you in the right direction, they may encourage you along that journey, and I hope they do. Good employers will, but you have at least a 50% or 51% part to play in that, if not more.
Krishna, we have a last question. There's a question from Kyle who asks about how organizations like Simplilearn are using partnerships with colleges and with higher education, and how do you select those partnerships, and what makes those partnerships different from other modes of learning or training?
So, Kyle, from Simplilearn perspective, see, we have partnered with some of the top institutions in the world, and the reason for our partnership is that those institutions have got built over a really long period of time, and they have a history of introducing topics and history of teaching new concepts in a way that not everybody understands that pedagogy. So, when we are partnered with an MIT and Caltech, they are known for teaching some of the toughest technology related topics, and they're experts, and some of their professors are authority in themselves when it comes to those topics, right? So our idea was to like build something that's not otherwise easily available for people from any part of the world to go and learn from them. So we wanted to get the best of the world to partner with us so that we can impart their knowledge to a wider audience all across the world. And our partnership philosophy is like very crisp and clear. We are only partnering with the top 10 institutions in the world, right? So it's not a partnership that we're looking at doing at all kinds of colleges and higher education institution. Is like very selective and very based on a very detailed criteria that we do. And there are other reasons also. See, if I'm partnering with MIT, Caltech, and Purdue on one side, I can't go and partner with institutions who are pretty lower in the ranking. Some of these institutions will not appreciate and will not like their name to be taken in the same fashion as many other institutions. So that's also is a driver when it comes to selecting our partnerships.
Okay, we have one last question. I think maybe Russell could take this. Talk about reskilling and upskilling, helping someone return to the workforce. Follow up from that user is, are there special challenges for people who are 50 or older?
Are there special challenges? Is that,
yeah,
was that the question?
For people who are 50 or older. Does that pose a special challenge for someone who's looking to get back into the workforce and looking to use maybe a skilling program as a path in?
I think that it shouldn't be. I'm not saying it wouldn't be in certain situations, but it really shouldn't be. And, you know, I think the biggest piece of advice to anyone reskilling and upskilling or thinking about re-entering the workplace is do as much work on yourself and understanding yourself and your drivers as you do on the new skills that you're learning, so that you confidently present yourself you know, in any interview situation. And it's as much about being balanced and structured in your own self, having that value and that worth, as it is the new skills. But I don't think age has anything to do with it. There's a great book out there called The 100-Year Life, and if you haven't read it, I suggest you read it. And it takes people through the fact that people are living longer, and therefore they need to consider their life over a much longer period of time, and that we'll all be thinking about second and third careers at different points and learning new skills and getting back in the workplace, and you know, or changing tack completely and going and doing something totally different. And it's a really uplifting read. So check it out. Not that I'm here to plug it; it's nothing to do with me. But you know, I personally don't think it should make any difference.
Great, that's very encouraging. So let me close out the session by saying thank you to our panelists. Krishna and Russell both have LinkedIn profiles, and I'm putting the LinkedIn profile links into the chat so that you can access them directly there. And with that, I'd just like to ask people to stay in touch with us on our social channels at Simplilearn, on Facebook and Twitter, and on LinkedIn. We're easy to find under Simplilearn. Russell, do you have social channels that you'd like to promote?
Yeah, if you just Google ILX Group, we've got Facebook channels, Twitter channels, LinkedIn channels, like all the usual socials. You'll find us there. You might even find us on Instagram these days.
Okay, and again, thank you both for being here and for a very lively discussion. We will be sending a link to the discussion recording to our attendees, and we'll also be sending a link to the white paper that we referenced in the presentation. So look for that in your email in the next few days. And to our attendees from India, joyous Diwali holiday, and thank you all for being here. That concludes our webinar today.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.